Poverty is not just a lack of money, it is a thief that steals dignity, bends decisions, and twists choices that would otherwise be clear. When you have nothing, even right and wrong start to blur under the weight of survival. Think about a family in rural Alabama in the early 1900s. They lived on land that gave them just enough to eat but never enough to save. The father worked the soil with his bare hands, and the mother spent every waking hour stretching scraps into meals. There was no safety net, no government programs, no health insurance, no community aid to fall back on. If the crops failed, they starved. If sickness came, they prayed, because doctors were too far away and too costly. Now imagine when one of their children fell sick, fever rose, their breathing slowed, and hope seemed to slip away. What would you do if you had no medicine, no money, and no help? Would you sit and watch, or would you beg, borrow, and sacrifice? Even if it meant hiding the truth of what happened when the child didn't make it. That's what poverty does. It corners people. It takes ordinary families and forces them to make extraordinary, sometimes unthinkable, choices. Choices they would never make if life had given them options. You see, from the outside, people often judge. They say, why didn't they ask for help? Why didn't they bury the child in the churchyard? Why keep it a secret? But judgment is easy when your stomach is full and your family is healthy. It's harder to understand when you've had nights where there was only enough food for the children and not the parents. It's harder to understand when you've watched death circle your home and you knew that even grief had to be hidden to avoid shame. In poverty, shame often weighs heavier than grief. In small towns, reputation was everything. A family that lost too many children might be branded cursed. A mother might be whispered about as unfit. A father might be called weak. And in a time when dignity was all a family had left, they guarded it fiercely, even if it meant burying their children in secret, under the orchard at midnight, rather than admitting to the town that tragedy had struck again. This is the twisted power of poverty. It doesn't just take away food or clothing, it takes away choices, it forces silence, it pushes people into shadows. But here's the lesson: just because poverty twists choices doesn't mean those choices define you. The family in Alabama may have been broken by circumstance, but their story now stands as a mirror for us. It forces us to ask, what would we do if life stripped us bare? Would we hold on to our humanity? Would we cling to honesty even when the world mocks us? Poverty creates a battlefield of the soul, and many who walk through it carry scars that last a lifetime. Children raised in poverty often grow up believing they are less than others because they saw their parents bow their heads, hide their pain, and make desperate decisions. But here is the truth: poverty is not a permanent prison. It is a test, it is a furnace, it is a place where character can either be broken or built. Some of the world's strongest, wisest, and most compassionate people come from backgrounds of poverty. Why? Because when you have walked barefoot, you learn the value of shoes. When you have gone hungry, you learn the value of bread. When you have been overlooked, you learn to see others. And when you have been forced to bury your pain in silence, you learn to appreciate the healing power of truth. The Alabama family's story may sound tragic, and it is, but it also carries a deeper message. Survival is never shameful. They did what they thought they had to do. Their choices may look twisted to us, but they were shaped by a life most of us will never understand. So here's the motivation. Poverty may twist your choices, but it doesn't have to twist your future. You may be in a place right now where money is short, opportunities are few, and life feels unfair. But remember this: poverty is not who you are, it is where you are. It is a season, not a sentence. Your parents may have made choices out of desperation. Your grandparents may have lived lives of silence and shame. But you, yes you, have the power to choose differently. You have the chance to take the pain of yesterday and turn it into the wisdom of tomorrow. Never let poverty rob you of your integrity. Never let it silence your voice. And never ever let it convince you that your worth is measured by what you own. The orchard in Alabama was filled with secrets, but it also bore fruit. That is life's paradox. Beauty can still grow from brokenness. So when you face poverty, don't bury your hope in the ground. Don't bury your dreams at midnight. Lift your head, speak your truth. Push forward, because poverty can twist choices, but with courage, faith, and perseverance, you can untwist your future. Shame is heavier than grief. Grief cries in the open, but shame hides in silence. Grief allows tears, but shame buries them. And in many families, especially in small towns like rural Alabama, the weight of shame was sometimes more unbearable than the tragedy itself. The Alabama family who buried their children in the orchard at midnight did not only act out of poverty, but out of shame. Poverty forced their hands, but shame sealed their lips. They weren't just burying their children. They were burying the whispers of neighbors, the raised eyebrows of townsfolk, and the lifelong labels that would follow them if the truth was known. In communities where everyone knew everyone, reputation was survival. A good name could open doors, while a ruined name could close them forever. If too many children in a family died, whispers began. If sickness clung to a household, rumors spread. There must be sin in that home, people would say. That family is cursed. In a world where pride was one of the only treasures the poor could afford, shame became a kind of death all its own, and so the family chose secrecy. They dug the graves at midnight, not because they didn't love their children, but because they loved them so deeply that they couldn't bear the judgment attached to their deaths. They believed silence would protect what little dignity they had left. But here's the truth: shame is a liar. It tells you to hide when you need help most. It tells you that people will reject you if they know your struggle, when in reality, the right people would embrace you. Shame chains people to secrets that eat away at them for years. The orchard became a symbol of that shame. Each tree bore fruit, but it also bore silence. Every harvest was a reminder not only of what was eaten, but of what was buried. And that is the tragedy of shame. It does not end with the moment of failure. It lingers. It poisons the soil of the soul until generations inherit what they never asked for. How many of us today are still carrying the weight of shame? Maybe not from burying children, but from burying secrets. Family secrets, mistakes, hidden addictions, broken marriages, abortions, financial ruin, betrayals, all locked away under the orchard of silence because we fear the judgment of others. But listen carefully, shame is not the same as guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. And when people confuse the two, they stop seeing themselves as worthy of forgiveness or love. That's when silence becomes their prison. The Alabama family teaches us a painful lesson. When you bury shame, you bury yourself. The fruit of the orchard may have fed their bodies, but the silence poisoned their souls. Here's where the motivation comes in. You don't have to carry the weight of shame any longer. You don't have to live in silence. The truth may hurt, but it heals. Speaking your story may invite judgment from some, but it will invite healing from others. And more importantly, it will invite freedom within yourself. Think about this. What would have happened if the family had faced their grief openly? What if they had allowed the preacher to pray over their children and allowed the town to mourn with them? Yes, some may have whispered, yes, some may have mocked, but others would have stood by them, others would have helped, others would have said, we've been there too, but shame robbed them of that chance. And today, shame continues to rob people of community, love, and healing. A man ashamed of his failure never asks for guidance. A woman ashamed of her past never seeks forgiveness. A child ashamed of their mistakes hides them until they grow into wounds that bleed into adulthood. Shame isolates, but the truth connects. The orchard in Alabama still speaks to us today. Whatever you bury in silence will eventually grow roots. Secrets grow into fear, lies grow into mistrust, and silence grows into generational pain. But when you uproot shame and drag it into the light, it loses its power. If you are carrying shame today, let this story free you. You are not your past. You are not your mistake. You are not what happened to you. Shame wants you to wear chains, but truth wants you to walk free. It is time to lift that weight. It is time to speak. It is time to tell your story, not so others can pity you, but so others can see that survival is not shameful, that struggle is not weakness, and that healing is possible. The family in Alabama learned too late that silence cost them more than shame ever could. But you don't have to repeat their mistake. Whatever your orchard is, whatever you've buried, don't let it define you. Dig it up, speak it, heal it, because shame only has power in the dark. Once you bring it to light, it dies. So remember this. Grief is heavy, but it is honest. Shame is heavier because it demands silence. Never let shame twist your story. Let your truth be louder than your fear. What is the value of a human life? Is it measured in years lived, in wealth accumulated, in the titles written on stone after death? Or is it something far deeper, something that exists even in the briefest breath of a child who never grew old enough to speak their first word? The Alabama family who buried their children in the orchard at midnight faced this question in its rawest form. Their children never had a chance to grow up, to dream, to build. To the outside world, they may have seemed like shadows quickly passing through history, but to that family, those children were not numbers. They were not just names left off the church records. They were pieces of their hearts, pieces of their legacy, and though they were buried in silence, their lives still mattered. The tragedy is not only that the children died, but that the family believed their lives were not worthy of public mourning. Poverty and shame twisted their perception, making them think their children's deaths were something to hide rather than honor. And yet, the value of a human life is never diminished by circumstance, by poverty, or by what the community says. A life is valuable simply because it exists. Think about this for a moment. If we truly understood the value of human life, how differently would we treat one another? How differently would we treat ourselves? Would we still waste years chasing approval while ignoring our purpose? Would we still look at others as less than, because of their poverty, sickness, or failures? Would we still bury our grief and silence our truth, thinking it unworthy of attention? The orchard where those children lay buried is a stark reminder of how often life is undervalued. Those children never had headstones. Their names were not carved in marble. They were not honored in the way the world typically honors the dead. But does that make their lives any less meaningful? Absolutely not. Every human life, no matter how brief or broken, carries a message. The life of a child who dies young reminds us of the fragility of existence. The life of someone who suffers reminds us of resilience. The life of someone who fails and rises again teaches us perseverance. And the life of someone forgotten by history still whispers truth into the present, that existence itself is sacred. You see, the value of life is not in how long it is lived, but in how deeply it touches others. The Alabama children, though gone too soon, left behind a story of silence, yes, but also a story that now teaches us about dignity, healing, and the cost of secrets. Their lives, though buried in darkness, still shine light for us today. So here's the motivation: never underestimate the worth of a human being. Not the stranger on the street, not the person society overlooks, not even yourself when you feel small and forgotten. You are valuable, not because of what you have, not because of how long you live, but because you are alive. The world we live in often measures value in productivity. If you can produce, if you can earn, if you can contribute, then you are praised. But the truth is, human worth is not tied to output. A newborn baby produces nothing, yet we cradle them like treasure. An elderly person at the end of their days may no longer work, yet their presence alone is a gift to the generations after them. A disabled person, a struggling addict, a broken soul, none of these are less valuable than the most powerful and successful. If anything, those who suffer the most often carry the deepest lessons for us. They remind us that life is not about status, but about humanity. The Alabama family believed that by hiding their children's burials, they were protecting their reputation. But what if they had seen the full value of those little lives? What if they had said, yes, our children were weak, yes, they were sick, but they were ours and they mattered? That simple acknowledgement would have lifted generations from silence to healing. And so I say to you, don't bury the value of your life or the lives of those you've lost. Speak their names, honor their existence, tell their stories, because in telling them, you remind the world that every heartbeat has meaning. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've buried grief under the soil of silence, thinking no one would understand. Hear me, their life still matters, their memory is still valuable, and by speaking it, you pass on their light instead of burying it in darkness. Maybe you look at your own life and wonder if it matters. You see your failures, your struggles, your poverty, and you think, what's the point? The point is this: your value does not come from perfection, it comes from existence. You were born with a purpose. You carry a story no one else can tell, and no matter how hard life has been, your presence in this world makes a difference. The orchard in Alabama bore fruit for many years, but its greatest fruit was not pecans or peaches. It was the reminder that life, even hidden life, has worth. Those children were never erased, though their graves were unmarked. They live on through the lessons their story teaches us today. So I leave you with this truth: the value of human life cannot be measured in years, wealth, or recognition. It is measured in being. Every breath is a gift, every life is a story, and every person, no matter how broken, poor, or forgotten, is worthy of dignity and remembrance. Don't bury life in silence, speak it. Honor it, protect it, because nothing is more valuable than the gift of being alive. There is a saying, what one generation hides, the next generation inherits. Secrets don't stay buried forever. They may sleep beneath the soil for years, but like roots, they spread, cracking through the foundations of families until the truth eventually bursts into the open. The Alabama family who buried their children in the orchard at midnight thought they were burying only their grief. They thought silence would protect their reputation, that secrecy would shield their children from the whispers of neighbors. But what they didn't realize was that silence itself became a curse. Generations later, the orchard still spoke, not with words, but with absence. The children who were buried there left no graves in the churchyard, no names on family records, no prayers in the open air. The family's descendants grew up sensing that something was missing, though they couldn't explain it. There were gaps in the stories. There were questions that no one dared ask. There were whispers in the corners of the home, and that silence carried a weight heavier than truth ever could. That is the power of generational secrets. What you hide in one lifetime echoes into the next. Children who grow up with silence learn to fear questions. They sense the unspoken, but they cannot name it. And so they grow into adults carrying invisible wounds, wounds they never created, but which were passed down to them like an inheritance of pain. Secrets don't just stay in the past, they shape the future. They distort identity, they create confusion. A child who grows up in a house where nothing is spoken learns that silence is safety. They learn to bury their own pain, their own mistakes, their own grief. And in doing so, they repeat the very pattern their parents once thought would protect them. The orchard in Alabama became more than a burial ground. It became a symbol of a generational curse of silence. What the parents refused to speak about, the children carried unknowingly, and that is how generational pain works. If it isn't healed, it is handed down. Think about your own family for a moment. How many secrets have been buried? How many stories were never told? A grandparent's addiction, a father's failure, a mother's heartbreak, a sibling's betrayal. Families often hide these things out of fear, shame, or the hope of protecting the next generation. But secrets never protect. They poison. They may cover shame for a moment, but they plant seeds of confusion, mistrust, and unspoken grief that grow for years. Here's the lesson: what you bury in silence doesn't disappear, it multiplies. But the good news is this: you have the power to break the cycle. Generational curses are real, but they are not permanent. They end the moment someone decides to stop burying the truth and start speaking it. When you tell the truth, you do not dishonor your family. You heal them. You take what has been hidden in darkness and bring it into the light, where it loses its power. Yes, the truth may hurt. Yes, it may bring tears. Yes, it may stir anger. But the truth also frees, and freedom is the greatest gift you can hand to the next generation. Imagine if the Alabama family had been honest. Imagine if they had stood before their community and said, "We lost our children, but we want their lives remembered." Imagine if they had chosen dignity and grief over secrecy and shame. Their children would have been honored, their family would have grieved together, and the orchard would not have carried silence but remembrance. Instead, the silence was passed down, and with it the haunting reminder that something was missing. And so the question falls to us: what secrets are we still carrying? What pain are we passing on, not because we want to, but because we refuse to speak it? Are there stories in your family that have been buried so deeply no one dares bring them up? Are there choices you've made that you've hidden, hoping no one will ever find out? Hear this truth: the only way to stop generational secrets from destroying generations is to speak. To confess, to bring what was hidden into the light, because silence is not safety. It is slavery. The orchard in Alabama teaches us this. You cannot bury pain forever. It will grow, it will spread, and it will find its way back to the surface, one way or another. So if you want freedom for yourself, and if you want freedom for your children, break the silence now. Speak the truth, tell the story, share the pain. Don't let your descendants inherit the burden of your silence. Give them the gift of honesty, so they can inherit healing instead of confusion. Generational secrets may destroy generations, but one brave voice can rebuild them. One confession, one truth, one moment of courage can break a cycle that has lasted for decades. Maybe your family has carried shame. Maybe your family has buried stories that no one talks about. But you can be the one who says, "It ends with me. The silence ends here. The truth will be spoken. Healing will begin." The orchard in Alabama grew fruit that fed bodies. But the truth, when spoken, grows fruit that feeds souls. Choose today what kind of orchard you want to leave behind. One filled with silence and secrets, or one filled with truth, healing, and freedom for generations to come. There is an old saying, "The truth will set you free." But many people never taste that freedom because they choose silence instead. Silence feels safer. Silence feels easier. Silence feels like control. Yet silence is a wound that never heals, a wound that festers beneath the surface, infecting not just one life, but entire generations. The Alabama family who buried their children in the orchard at midnight thought silence would protect them. They thought hiding their grief would shield their family from judgment and preserve their reputation. But in truth, silence became the very chain that bound them. Every season when the orchard blossomed, every harvest when fruit fell heavy from the branches, they were reminded not just of food and survival, but of what lay beneath. The silence spoke louder than words, and it spoke in pain. This is the paradox. Silence feels like protection, but in reality it is poison. When you bury the truth, it does not stay buried. It grows roots, it spreads. It passes through families like an infection. Children grow up sensing it, spouses feel it in unspoken tensions, grandchildren inherit it as a shadow they cannot name. Silence wounds not only the one who carries it, but everyone who comes after. Truth, on the other hand, heals, even when it hurts. The first cut of truth may sting like a knife, but it is the cut of a surgeon, not a wound of an enemy. Truth removes the infection, cleans the wound, and makes healing possible. Yes, there are tears when truth is spoken. Yes, there is anger, sometimes even rejection. But those reactions fade. What remains is freedom, peace, and the power to move forward without the chains of secrecy. Think about it. How many lives have been destroyed not by the failure itself, but by the silence that followed? A man makes a mistake, but instead of admitting it, he hides it. A woman suffers abuse, but instead of speaking, she carries it alone. A child grows up in dysfunction, but instead of asking for help, the family buries it under silence. And in the end, the secret wounds them far more than the truth ever could have. The Alabama family's silence wounded them deeply. It wounded their children who survived, who grew up never fully understanding why grief could not be spoken aloud. It wounded future generations who inherited confusion instead of clarity. The orchard bore fruit, but it also bore unspoken pain. Here is the lesson: silence does not protect you. It imprisons you, and truth, no matter how painful, always heals. If that family had spoken the truth, if they had buried their children in the churchyard and allowed the town to grieve with them, their healing would have begun immediately. The whispers might have come, yes, but healing would have followed too. Instead, by burying their grief in silence, they buried themselves with it. And isn't that what so many of us do today? We carry wounds we never speak of. We hide mistakes as if shame will crush us if they come to light. We put on masks, pretending we're fine, while inside, the silence is eating us alive. But the truth is not your enemy. The truth is your ally. The truth is your bridge from pain to peace. When you tell the truth, you release the weight you've been carrying. You break the cycle of silence that poisons generations. You invite healing both for yourself and for those around you. It doesn't matter how dark your secret is. It doesn't matter how deep your wound runs. The truth may sting, but it is the sting of medicine, not poison. Silence, on the other hand, may feel comfortable for a time, but it is the slow drip of poison into the soul. The orchard in Alabama is proof. For years, that family carried silence, but silence never gave them peace. It only gave them shadows, and when the truth finally surfaced generations later, it came not as shame, but as healing. A granddaughter finally understood why her family carried such heavy sadness. She wept, yes, but she also forgave. She chose to break the silence and tell the story, so the orchard would no longer be a symbol of secrecy, but of learning and freedom. And that is what truth does. It turns wounds into lessons, pain into power, and silence into freedom. So here is the challenge. Whatever you are carrying, whatever silence has chained you, dare to speak the truth. Don't wait for another generation to wonder, to guess, to carry a shadow that was never theirs. End it now, heal it now, set yourself free now, because truth heals, it always has, and it always will. And silence may feel safe, but it wounds deeper than you realize. Don't bury your truth in the orchard of your soul. Plant it in the open, let the sun hit it, let the rain water it, and watch it grow into freedom. Truth is the key, silence is the lock. Choose freedom, choose healing, choose truth. The past has weight. Some carry it like a feather, light and barely felt. Others carry it like chains, heavy and dragging behind them with every step. And for the Alabama family who buried their children in the orchard at midnight, the past became a weight that shaped their lives long after the graves were dug. They thought secrecy would protect them. They thought silence would shield them from shame, but in burying their children in silence, they also buried themselves in the past. Every time they walked through that orchard, they were reminded not only of who they had lost, but of what they had chosen to hide. The trees grew taller, the fruit sweeter, but the sorrow remained rooted beneath the soil. That is the danger of holding on to the past. It binds you to pain that was never meant to be permanent. Grief is natural, loss is real, mistakes are human. But when you clutch them too tightly, when you let them define your present, you become a prisoner of yesterday, and a prisoner of yesterday cannot walk into tomorrow. The family's orchard should have been a place of life, of growth, of renewal. Instead, it became a silent graveyard of shame, because they never let go of the past. They held on to secrecy, they held on to fear, and in doing so, they let yesterday control today. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending the pain never happened. It does not mean the loss is erased. Letting go means releasing the hold that the past has on your future. It means learning from the pain without living in it. It means allowing the story of yesterday to become wisdom instead of chains. We all have orchards in our lives. Some are filled with memories of mistakes. Some are filled with secrets we buried in silence. Some are filled with wounds that still ache when we walk past them. And too often, we spend our lives walking through those orchards, replaying the past, reliving the hurt, and wondering if it could have been different. But here is the truth. You cannot rewrite yesterday. You cannot dig it up and change it. You can only release it, honor it, and move forward. Letting go gives life. Why? Because it frees the energy you've been pouring into regret and allows you to pour it into growth. It frees your heart from bitterness so you can love again. It frees your mind from replaying the same pain so you can dream again. And it frees your soul from shame so you can live again. The Alabama family's orchard teaches us this. If they had let go of shame, their grief could have turned into healing. Their silence could have turned into story. Their orchard could have become a place of remembrance instead of regret. But they held on, and by holding on, they allowed the past to define them. Don't make the same mistake. Whatever your orchard is, whatever you've buried, you must choose to release it. You cannot change what happened. You cannot undo the choices made, but you can decide today that the past will not chain you anymore. Letting go requires courage. It requires admitting the truth. It requires forgiving. Sometimes others, sometimes yourself. And forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is freedom. When you forgive, you are not saying what happened was okay. You are saying what happened will no longer control me. Imagine carrying a heavy stone in your hands every day. At first, it seems manageable, but as days turn into weeks and weeks into years, the weight becomes unbearable. That is what holding on to the past does. It weighs you down until you can no longer move forward. Letting go is not about throwing the stone away, it's about laying it down, saying, "I don't need to carry this anymore." The orchard in Alabama bore fruit because the earth knows how to let go. Trees drop their leaves every fall. They don't cling to what is dying, they release it so that new life can come in spring. Nature itself teaches us that letting go is not death. It is preparation for renewal, and so must we. We must learn to release the past, to drop the leaves of shame, regret, and grief so that new life can grow. Maybe you've been carrying guilt for years. Maybe you've been chained by secrets, by mistakes, by failures you've never spoken of. Maybe you've been walking through your orchard, staring at the ground, mourning what you buried there. Hear this today. It is time to let go. It is time to stop watering the soil of regret. It is time to stop feeding the roots of shame. It is time to step into the freedom of now. Letting go gives you back your life. It gives your children a new legacy. It gives your family a new story. It turns orchards of silence into orchards of hope. The Alabama family's orchard still whispers a lesson to us. Don't let the past keep you in chains. Let it go. Speak the truth. Honor the loss, yes, but then release it, because life is not meant to be lived in yesterday. It is meant to be lived today with hope for tomorrow. So let go, forgive, release, step forward, because when you let go of the past, you don't lose, you gain. You gain freedom, you gain peace, you gain life.